And we are live here with another monthly edition of a live Q&A with Kobo Writing Life. I'm going to give everyone a second to join the chat and let us know where you're coming from. We have Shane has said hello from Kansas and Johanna's in Kitchener. Well, we've got Canadian-filled chat for the next hour. I am here in Toronto. And Zoe, are you in London?
I'm in London, yeah.
Ontario, London, Ontario.
London, Ontario, the little London.
Yeah, so we have lots of Canadian representation. So yes, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Oh, Tasha's in Costa Rica. I'm jealous of that. It's like going into winter here, so Costa Rica would be a wonderful place to be. Awesome. So I am super stoked to have Zoe York with us today, who is the author of 69 romance novels and novellas. I don't know if you can write any more because that's such a sexy number to stay on, Zoe. You got to just stay on this, the author of 69 books. And you have 3 nonfiction books about craft and the business of writing, genre fiction. And you live in London, Ontario, as we've mentioned. And I'm really, really pleased to have you here. So welcome, Zoe.
Thank you for having me. I love Kobo.
Thanks. If anyone has any questions throughout, be sure to drop them into the chat and we'll pull them up through and kind of intertwine with them. Oh, Virginia's in New Mexico. Virginia, that was my last place I visited in the before times. And I loved it. I did a Georgia O'Keeffe pilgrimage to New Mexico.
Oh, amazing.
I know I want to go back once we can like kind of travel again relatively easily. But cool, let's get right into it. So Zoe, if people aren't familiar with you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing career? How did you get your start? Have you always been a writer?
I have always been a writer. I have not always been a genre fiction author. I made that leap in 2012, and it's because of Kobo. So
that's the year that we launched. Was it to coincide with Kobo Writing Life?
It was not, because I didn't actually hit publish until 2013. Okay. But I have been a lifelong genre fiction reader. And in university, I was an English major. I wrote a lot of poetry, as a lot of English majors do. And then I used writing in my career. I worked in medical education, and I would write cases modeled on real medical conditions for actors to portray to medical students. And so I would have to sometimes script encounters and give them accurate backstories and that sort of thing. So I was pretty good at characterization. And in my free time, I would read romance novels. I did not really care who the author was, or I don't even really think I was conscious of like something like there being a series particularly. I would pick up a book that I liked at the bookstore or a yard sale or a used bookstore, and I trusted based on like cover and title and, you know, all those kind of genre fiction hints that I would get something that had like an HEA, a happy ever after ending. And I read widely across all romance subgenres. And then in 2011, I had my second son, and a friend of mine gave me a Kobo so that I could read one-handed in the middle of the night without like, you know, needing to juggle a book and a baby while I was nursing. Mm-hmm. And that Kobo literally changed my life, because suddenly at the back of a book, there was a link to read the next book by that author or the next book in that series. And I, instead of reading really broadly across all of romance, I started to go really deep down series. And I read, I had previously read Unlawful Contact by Pamela Clare. And I knew that that was a book that I liked. So I read her entire I-Team series that was available at that time, which I think was to book 4 maybe. And then I read a lot of Kaylee Cross, who is an indie author who had a couple of books out then. And then I got into small town romance, and I read a lot of Susan Mallory's Backlist. I read Olive Virgin River. I read Jalvis's Lucky Harbor up to, I think it was book 5, which is Matt and Amy's book. And this is I remember it so clearly. And I got to the end of that book, and I just wanted more of that, but set in Canada. And I looked for, I think I Googled or maybe I was on Goodreads at that point. And I found Vivian Arend, who had some books. She's indie published now, but I think at the time her books were with Sing, and gobbled up all of those. And then I thought I could write something like this. So it's because of Kobo and discovering series. And so it was probably early 2012. I spent like 3 months doing nothing but nonstop reading ebooks. And then I started writing. And about a year and 3 months later, I published my first book, and I published it on Kobo as well as other platforms.
Wow, I didn't know that connection of just coming from like being such a reader, especially on a Kobo device. That's a great selling feature. Maybe we don't like express that enough. I'll bring it to the team to just be like, yeah, people can like, it connects them to more and more books. Like this is why digital reading is great. That's really awesome though, that you kind of went through it like that. And was it from reading series? Is that how you sort of realized that you wanted to then write like in a serialized manner as well?
Part from my reading experience, but that came more from other authors. So once, maybe by the middle of 2012, I knew I wanted to explore this as a side career. At the time, I worked in medical education at a university, and I went in search of like online writing communities. So I think my first one was Absolute Write. Then I found K-Boards, and it's from K-Boards that I found a website called Romance Divas. And Romance Divas was my original, like, oh, this is my squad. This is the community online that's going to tell me what I need to know. Because there were hybrid authors, there were trad authors, there were indie authors, and it was there. It was on Romance Divas that I learned the selling power of a series, a metadata connected series where eventually you make the first book free. So when I published my first book, I knew that that book would eventually be the first book in a series, and I would make it free, and I would get a BookBub, and then people would read it on Kobo and on other platforms, read that one for free, and then keep reading. And so I knew that came from other writers. I learned that lesson from other writers.
Nice. So how did you like start with just like realizing that you wanted to write in this genre to now having like the sexy 69 books that you have? Like how did it build up? Because that's like, you know, less than a 10-year gap that we're talking, and that's crazy. That's you're just pounding out the books.
So definitely novellas were a big part of that. I don't actually know what the breakdown is of novellas to novels in my catalog. I know that my two longest series, I have two kind of sections of books. I have my Navy SEAL books and my small town romance as Zoe. And I think that my Zoe catalog is around 45 of the 69 books. The other books are written as a pen name, Ainsley Booth. And all of my Navy SEAL books are novellas. So they're long novellas, like around 25 to 35,000 words. And most of my small town books are novels. My first series was a mixed length, and that is a much harder series to generate complete sell-through on. So then when I went to my next two series, a Navy SEAL series, and then Pine Harbor, which is my newest small town, Pine Harbor is all novels, and there are 11 of those. And the Navy SEAL books are all novellas, and there are 17 of those. So it's kind of an even split, probably, of total words devoted to those. I do find that the novels have more evergreen sales potential than the novellas. Like a 5-year-old novella is a harder book to sell in volume, harder book to send ads to than a 5-year-old novel. A 5-year-old 100,000 word novel is almost as saleable today as it was when it released. So I do think that there's a balance to be found between like, building a backlist quickly by writing novellas. That's good. It finds you readers in a faster way. That faster release can have a lot of marketing advantages. But in the long term, having a catalog of novels, particularly one big meaty series that people can read through and you can do evergreen promotions to, because some promotions are limited to novel length books, like particularly BookBub. So I found so I do think that there's a balance of where you put your words, but writing short can definitely help you build that catalog faster than if you only write novels.
That's a great tip. And you were mentioning there about like backlist books. And one of my favorite quotes from your your nonfiction book was that all books become backlist, which I
Yeah.
think is like very important to keep in mind, that like
Yes.
everything you publish will be your backlist that you will constantly be kind of pushing to, and getting new readers through that backlist.
And I think that there are two different marketing approaches. The marketing approach for a frontlist book is different than the marketing approach for a backlist book. And ideally, you want to start crafting product, because your product, the books that we write, that is an integral part of the whole marketing chain of events, right? Marketing is not just selling the book after it comes out, but also choosing which products to develop and produce. And I call them products and not books because I'm thinking about it I also call them books, but when I'm thinking about it from a business angle, it's very helpful to remember that these are products that we're producing. And the more that a book can both be pitched as frontlist on its own standalone, even if it exists in a series, what is the standalone pitch ability of it? That helps with your frontlist sales launch. But then down the road, is it metadata connected to other books? Is it an interesting catalog entry point? Those are more important to me than the hook, for example, when it's a backlist book.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable advice. It sounds like you got started, you did your research, and like you knew that you were going to take advantage of like the first book in a series or like a longer series. But is there something that you wish you knew starting out now, like that would have been like served you even better?
So I think that it's also important to remember that all of the things that we trip over along the way, we learn so much from those experiences. And while I wish that I knew, for example, I mentioned that my first series is very variable in length. The first book that I published is now book 2 of the series, because I wrote a prequel novella, and then on some platforms, prequel novellas are absolutely invisible, because if you call it, like, for example, 0.5, like 0.5 in the series, it's not always metadata connected to whole integer books. I don't think that's an issue on Kobo, but it is
Sure
on some other
isn't. No,
platforms.
we let you do
Sure
it.
isn't. Plug for Kobo.
Yeah.
But also, like, once you start having third-party sites like BookBub and Goodreads numbering your series, you have to be consistent across all the platforms. So as flexible as Kobo is in that regard, it makes it tricky if other platforms don't allow for part integer numbering systems. Anyway, so I did not know that. I didn't know how important metadata was until I was into the career. I didn't know how important things like that cold audience hook was. So for example, my very first book is a small town romance. Small town romance is not a category. Metadata wise, that doesn't really help you that much, other than maybe as a search term. And it's about a doctor. And when I started, medical romance was not a category anywhere. It's starting to be introduced as a category, but only very recently. It's about a doctor and a teacher in a small town, second chance romance. And from a metadata perspective, the only category it fits into is contemporary romance, which is the largest category. So one of the things that I did in my second small town series was I made all of the protagonists either military or first responders, because those are both secondary categories that help narrow that focus and give you bonus metadata to place in, right?
Yeah,
And then the other thing is the variable length.
Yeah, that's wonderful advice, because to even just to shift your writing to fit into a category, because it is very limiting to just have one kind of overarching category like that. That's always advice that I give some authors, especially if somebody had published on Kobo some years ago and hasn't revised the categories. Like, we sometimes add new ones. But yeah, if you're just having romance contemporary, your book really will get lost. So yeah, that's really valuable advice.
And it's really not about, like, I'm not ever going to tell anybody they should write something other than what they want to write. But if you know what the metadata options are, then you might make a different choice from the short list of what you want to write.
Yeah, nice. That's really good advice. There is a very good question here from Julia. She wants to know what your thoughts are on a series that doesn't necessarily reflect your writing style anymore. So do you keep it in the backlist? Do you let it dwindle? Do you unpublish it? What would your advice be on this?
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, I've written 69 books.
Sexy.
It's sexy, very sexy number. Not all of those 69 books are currently available for sale. Most of them are, including my first few. So it's not always your earliest books that need to be unpublished. Okay, actually, I'm going to tell a difference. So I went to a music concert. Sarah McLachlan, good Canadian singer.
Yep.
And it was this wonderful interactive concert where you could ask questions. You put them in a hat in the lobby, and then in between sets, she would pull questions out of the hat and answer them. And one of the questions that she pulled out of the hat was, why don't you play songs from your first album? So if anyone knows her whole catalog, her first disc, she never plays songs from it at her concerts anymore. And Sarah's a very interesting person because one of the other answers that she gave was that she doesn't listen to music that isn't her own at home because she always has music in her head. So why does she need to listen to music outside her head? She doesn't want to perform songs that she doesn't feel deeply connected to. So she is grateful that that album exists, that it found her some listeners, and that it gave her the opportunity to make future albums that she still connects with, but those songs no longer. That album is still available to buy. I think I probably heard her say that 5 years ago, and it has lived in my head ever since. That it is absolutely okay that we have Backlist that no longer represents the stories that we currently want to tell. And I also don't think they hurt us particularly to exist out there. But every so often, there are books that we regret writing for whatever reason. Maybe we rushed the editing. Maybe we picked the story of a character that maybe wasn't ours to tell, whatever. I do therapy a lot during this panorama. And one of the things that my therapist says to me is there's a big difference between regret and shame. Regret is a very healthy emotion that tells us we either have a problem to fix or a problem to move away from. So you can leave that book published and just move away from it, lower it in the listing on your website, maybe even take it off your website completely and just let it be. And if that solves the regret, then that's a perfectly acceptable option. The other thing we can do is sit with it and change it, but that rarely has like commercial value. So I don't really recommend that. And then the third option is to take it down from sale. And so the right answer for each of those options is the one that feels best to you. What we don't want to do is let that regret slide into shame. Like we should never experience shame about what we've written in the past. And the difference between regret and shame, regret is I've made a mistake, and shame is I am a mistake. And sometimes, I mean, artists are very emotional and mercurial, and writers are artists just like anyone else. And sometimes we can get really big in our feels around, I feel ashamed about producing. That's something if anyone ever has any questions about that, like this is the specific title, what do you think I should do? I'm generally available. Like you can find me on Twitter and Facebook and send me a DM. But just like tap into that like inner feeling. Make sure that you're just kind of like dealing with regret, which is fixable. Don't feel shame about anything in the past. Like a lot of us sometimes feel, the reason why that book isn't selling is because it's not written well enough. That is never the case. That's never the case. Like there are lots of like only mediocrely written books that sell just fine.
And I like
Yeah,
that you
no,
always say as well that, you know, your next book is always going to be better read or, oh my God, written better
yeah.
than your previous book. Especially as you evolve, you know, you get better at everything. So yeah, I think that's a great point to keep in mind.
And in all art, that what you have done in the past and what your backlist looks like actually has almost no bearing on how well the next thing does, which is very hard to believe if you haven't had a breakout success. But there are oodles of examples of breakout successes where there is a really kind of, let's say, even clumsy looking backlist behind it, and it has no bearing. So just keep writing.
Nice. Thank you. I hope that helped, Julia. You're talking about breakout success there. I'm curious, just you personally, like, what was the milestone that you hit when you realized, like, this is it, this is my career, like I'm a writer, or you know, what was the goal that you hit?
Well, so I've done this twice. I think of 2 points. The first one, in hindsight, was pretty cocky of me. So I mentioned that I had another career when I started writing, and I worked at a university, and I was a manager, and my position was eliminated on May 1st, 2014. But April 30th, 2014, I hit the USA Today list and the New York Times list for the first
Wow.
time. So the next day when I went into work and HR comes in and they're like, have bad news, here's a package. They advised me to get a lawyer, to, you know, there were options in front of me. And my only question for the lawyer was, if I write, does that count as me finding a new job? Because that affected my package. And he said, that's not a job. Like, he was kind of like, are you kidding me? You want to just write? But so at the time, that felt like a sign from the market that, and I was not making full-time money at the time, but it felt like maybe I could do this. And it did take me most of my severance package period to get to the point where I was making full-time money. But then, so the first time that you hit a list, it's a little, it could be a fluke, you know, you could be like, but then in June of 2016, Sadie Holler and I we released Prime Minister, and Prime Minister was a USA Today list bestseller on release, and then it
Wow.
hit again the following year. But once it hit on release, I was like, we did that. Like, it wasn't on sale. It wasn't like there wasn't a huge ad buy for it. It was the right book at the right time, hit the market. And once I experienced that, like up, down, and the third kind of up was Prime Minister. And it felt like, okay, I'm doing, because everything is, it's a cycle. It's this roller coaster and it's a cycle. And the more ups you have and the more downs you survive, the more you start to understand it's a game, it's a gamble, it's a game of chance, and you just have to keep doing it. And that's how you kind of find income stability and the mechanisms to shore you up when you hit those low points. They are inevitable. They are not avoidable.
Yeah, I like when I've heard you talk before about kind of being able to, you know, have a plan and be flexible with a plan. And it always seems that like you're sort of unbreakable in a sense that like I feel like because you're so aware of like, yes, a down's going to come. I mean, not that you could have predicted like a global pandemic or anything, but I feel like you've probably really tailored your writing to it. So I'm kind of curious about like how is your plans changed over the past like 18-ish months, and like yeah, how did that affect your writing?
Yeah, I stopped writing in March of last year. And I didn't start again until May, which at the time felt like the world's longest break. It actually wasn't the longest break. I also had a 6-month break from writing in 2018. My husband had a health crisis, and I just my family required me to like put my focus elsewhere. And also, I really struggled back in 2018 with, there's a certain like fantasy escape that you have to get into to be able to write the kind of romance that I write. It's very soft and warm and fuzzy, and I wasn't in that space. And so when the pandemic hit, it felt very much the same. I was like, I mean, I don't know when this thing is going to end. How do I write people touching when we're not like masks. I don't know. I felt like it felt very dysfunctional suddenly again. But because I had been through that once before, I knew like I got therapy and I focused on other things like book marketing for a couple of months, about 2 months. And then in May, I slowly started writing again. And I think in the blog post that we shared, I used a quote from Taylor Swift. And I did a talk last year at Romance Author Mastermind. And while I was prepping for that talk, I was watching something on Disney Plus, and a commercial came on for the Taylor Swift folklore session, folklore recording sessions. And she says something, I'm paraphrasing now, but something about if we're going to have to recalibrate, which is everyone has to recalibrate during the pandemic, start with what you love the most. And that was like a light bulb. Like, what do I love writing the most? What do I want to write? One of the things that I've really leaned into over the pandemic is giving myself permission, and other people, if anyone needs permission right now, to let go of stuff. It's okay. It's okay to put a series on hiatus. It's okay to gracefully back out of a project that you've committed to. It's okay to absolutely like shift gears. One of the things, and not on Kobo right now, but one of the things that I'm doing is I'm writing a little bit under an alter ego, secret pen name that nobody knows about, just because it was easier in some ways, just if, we can also, when we are doing this as a career, we can get locked into feeling like what we should do. And this is something Sarah Cannon, who's a YA author, and she has a YouTube channel called Heart Breathings. She has a course called HB90, which is a quarterly planning course for authors. And one of the things she talks about is the danger of getting stuck into that should list, right? She helps people divide their to-do list into need to do, things you've committed to, like a pre-order, for example. Should do, what we're hearing from all those external voices, like get into audio, get into translations, write a serial, write cliffhangers, write whatever, right? And then want to do. And if our whole to-do list is being pulled from that should do list instead of want to do, it's so draining. Whereas if we, really look at our what do we want to do? What do we love the most? That's where the real direction will come from.
Nice. That's really great. I think like trying to think of like what you should do versus what you want to do is I mean, I think that's valuable advice even outside of writing and stuff like that. But you're somebody that really keeps on the nose of like changing publishing trends and industry trends. So how do you balance that with like, I really want to do this project that I love, but now the industry is shifting this way, and like how do you adapt? Just wondering, like, yeah, how do you find the balance there?
So I'm hesitant to chase any trend, but there are some trends that are worth chasing. And so that's really about waiting. So what you want to write is probably the most long-term, stable, lucrative path, but it might not be sexy money. So I write small town romance. And when I started writing, like I mentioned that I really was reading a lot of like Robin Carr and Jill Shalvis. And in 2012, that was at a peak when I was reading it. 2013, when I first published my book, that was starting to slide. By 2015, small town romance was definitely at a low point in the curve. That didn't mean that people weren't making money still with small town romance, but it's just the sales cap, the potential used to be higher and then it was lower. That's a bigger deal for publishers who basically see success as this binary, like yes, no, did you move 20,000 units or not? As an indie publisher, I don't need to move 20,000 units for a book to be very profitable for me. If I move 4,000 units, that can be really lucrative. So it's not like I stopped writing small town romance, but more that I was like, okay, but what else can I write? And so in 2014, but then in 2015, I slowed down how much small town romance I was writing. And I increased how much Navy SEAL romance I was writing because military romance was on a big upswing then. Right now, well, over the last year, some military romance has continued to do really well. Like Susan Stoker is at the top of the charts. Janie Crouch is doing really well. But in general, I think that for me, from my vantage point, every single person, publisher, working at a retailer, author, reader, we all occupy a specific vantage point in the industry, and we can see what we can see from where we are standing, and we can't see what we can't see. So even though I do try to keep my finger on the pulse, I don't always know what's going on, but from where I stand, what I'm looking at, I see military romances waning just a little bit and small town on the rise again. And so I leaned into that and I wrote more small town and less military. And I found that my income stayed level because I made that shift. Somebody else might make a different call, and that's fine. I have never, up until this year, chased what some people talk about, like writing to market. It's often not on Kobo. We're talking about like KDP Select, the Kindle Unlimited type books. That changes really quite quickly. Like those cycles move much faster than like the small town romance cycle is like very slow and up and down. The KU, it's changing probably every 6 months. What is like the hottest thing? Up until this summer, there was no trend that I saw that I was interested in hopping on with like short fiction or something like that. And then this summer, I read a couple of Kindle Unlimited books, and I was like, I might have some ideas here. And so I dipped my toe in that marketplace. In 8 years, it's the first time that has been the right decision for me to do. And I don't know how long that will last. So I think it was, I'm terrible with sports. There's a guy, he's there, and he owns a sports team, and I don't remember who he is, but he says, you should know when you're riding a bull market. And I think that chasing any market trend like that is you're gambling on being able to ride that bull market. It's not 100% going to be your author brand selling those books, and you're not going to retain as many readers from those books as you will from the slower trends that you follow by building an author brand. So with small town readers, I can retain a lot of those. Military romance readers, I can retain a lot of those. This like hot trend that I'm writing on the alter ego, I don't retain nearly as many of those readers because to them, I am interchangeable with any other author writing the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like jumping on like the kind of 6-month trend like that as well must be sort of exhausting. Like constantly like figuring it out or changing. It would feel sort of like frantic to me. So I like your tactic of like just really feeling when it is right for you to do and when you have interest in the genre itself. So I think we've lost your video. Are you there? All right. Well, we can wait 1 second while Zoe reconnects. I'll entertain. But yeah, if you're interested in learning more about any of Zoe's writing advice, I think the link is in the chat there. That Zoe has this wonderful book called Romance Your Brand, basically how you can sort of use romance subgenre. Not tricks really, but advice into how to make a really good genre fiction book as a part of a series. So we're going to see if Zoe comes back. So anyone have any questions that you wanted to ask Zoe or put to me as you were here? I am definitely, we can get her back on and like keep chatting, but let me know in the meantime. Tasha, you said you're really that you love Prime Minister. What was it about that book that you really, really enjoyed? And Trace is also a big fan of Zoe's books as well, so that's great to see in the comments. She's a real prolific author and has just such wonderful advice. So I'm excited that we got to chat with her, and hopefully she can come back. But if not, I'm just going to make her come back on another date so we can get different advice. She's here, guys. I see her coming. You're back.
I'm back. I'm sorry. How much of that got cut off?
I don't know. So maybe all of it.
We can move forward to the next question.
Sure. I was just asking though, you've got some such good fans in the comments here. Tasha says that she loves Prime Minister and that it was a wonderful escape. Sexy but warm and cozy. So it was really great stuff. Can you hear me, Zoe? I think we might have some more connection. Oh, you're back? Okay, great.
Okay, I can see you. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. Tasha has a question here that I was going to throw to you. Just wondering how you structure your days. Do you have a schedule for writing, for business things? What does your day-to-day look like?
So I tend to write in the afternoon. I want to be one of those people who can write first thing in the morning, but I tend to need to think about my scenes. So I only write first thing in the morning if I know exactly what needs to be written. Ronnie Lauren talks about this in a class, the difference between creative work and busy work or productive work. And she means it in a different way, as in like you should protect your creative work time because you're the only person who can do that. But for me, writing the first 2/3 of the book is creative work. And then the last third of the book is a mix of like busy work or productive work and creative work. And I find that I can do the productive work, like tidying, editing, stitching scenes together. I can do that first thing in the morning, but anything that is kind of deeply creative where I really need to like tap into my characters, that has to come later after a few hours of thinking. So I tend to do my admin work in the morning, kind of clear the decks by noon, and then I try to write from about noon to 5. And I'm a very slow writer. It takes me like 3 to 5 hours to write 1,000 words or 1,500 words. If I get 2,000 words in a day, I am very happy. So I've written a lot of books over the years. It's certainly not because I write a lot of words each day, but more that I try to write most days. I don't believe you have to write every day or anything like that. But for me, the more time I get butt in chair, the more words I end up writing.
Nice. Dana is asking, I wonder if that answers, how do you find time to write with like looking after kids and like, looking after your house and your yard? Is that how you do it? Like you just define like these 4 hours are going to be my like creative writing hours?
Yeah. And also I will abandon the house. I won't abandon my children. But they are very also self-sufficient now. I have a 9-year-old and a 13-year-old. And I have more writing time now than I did when they were younger. When they were younger, like before my youngest was in school, he went to daycare 3 days a week and then those 3 days were the only days that I wrote, unless it was on the weekend. But also my family does a lot. Like they are very respectful, appreciative of what my career has given us. If they want to, for example, go on a trip to Australia, that only happens because mommy writes. So they're pretty awesome cheerleaders. They will bring me coffee, snacks, stay out of my way. And they're also like, we try to be very attentive parents at dinner and at bedtime. Even though my kids are 9 and 13, I still tuck them in. I still lie down with the 9-year-old. So they get time with me later in the day because they kind of leave me alone in that writing time. And I outsource a lot. Like I get a meal kit service now. I used to, when they were younger, I would have fully prepared meals brought to me. Not right now because of the pandemic, but in the past I've used like a housekeeping service, outsourcing the things that would take time from writing to protect the writing time.
Nice.
And all of that is a privilege. Absolutely.
Liza has a question that I also wanted to talk to you about. She wanted to know how you decide which name or brand to focus your attention on. Mm-hmm. Is it like money, passion, or do you just go with your gut? Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to ask you about like splitting into the 2 pen names as well. Does that make it harder for you that you have to sort of balance these 2 different personalities? Or was it beneficial for the kind of just really defining those genres?
So there are a couple of, there's always pros and cons. It goes kind of back to what I was saying about those trends, that if I write only small town romance, then I'm more left to the whims of the market as to the potential income high that I could reach, or kind of what the basement of that is. I'll still make money, but it'd be more up and down. So when I went from just writing small town to writing small town and military, then that gave me two income streams that were rather independent of each other. When I added a pen name, that's a third income stream that is independent of the other two. I think that once you have a backlist of 10 books, 15 books, maybe 20, I don't know what the number is. The number is probably different for each person. Then you can really slow down in your output for that pen name. It was very hard when I started writing as Ainsley. And the reason I wrote as Ainsley is because Ainsley's first book has a very provocative title. Apologies to anyone who has tender ears. It's called Hate Fuck. Fuck is spelled with like symbols in it. And I wasn't sure that I wanted my mother-in-law to know that I had written a morally gray anti-hero with that title. Of course, then when it did well, I really wanted her to know that it did well. So the secret didn't last very long. But like this alter ego that I mentioned before, she's never going to know about that, because it's short Insta smut. Like, she's never going to know about that. But anytime you can add a leg on your stool, you are potentially increasing your overall income stability. That being said, after I started writing as Ainsley, like HF, that's what I call the first book. HF, I first launched it as a serial. It had a modest success as the serial. And then I repackaged it as a single complete story and released that in August of 2015. And it hit the USA Today list on release. So that was a really big launch. But then from August 2015 to January 2016, when I released my second Ainsley book, there was a long stretch there where HF only sold like a few copies a week, because one author name, one book, like that's a hard sell. And then the second book came out. I spent too much money on the release of it and then didn't really earn that investment back. I thought that it would do better because the first book hit the USA Today list. That was a big lesson learned. And then the third Ainsley book that I released was Prime Minister, which again hit the USA Today list. That being said, today, I mentioned at the top, like you mentioned, I have 69 books, and I think 45 of them are Zoe books, which would mean that 25 are Ainsley books. That doesn't feel quite right. It's probably more than that. It's probably 50 something are Zoe books. Today, when Ainsley hasn't had a release since the spring, Ainsley makes like a quarter of what Zoe does, because Ainsley really only has one brand. Zoe has two. Zoe has more books. There's more opportunity for that backlist promotion. And when we talked about all books become backlist, regardless of the strength of your brand, if you don't have a really incredible front list behavior going on, which absolutely skews backlist performance, all backlist is almost relatively equal across genre fiction. You can say that across all active, like successful mid-list authors, regardless of genre, most of their backlist books are going to sell maybe 1 to 10 copies a day per book, per title. That's it. I have looked at so many authors rank. I have talked to so many authors over time, and there are outliers. There are people who sell less than that. There are people who sell more than that, but the average consistently is in that range. So it doesn't matter that Ainsley maybe has bigger spikes than Zoe on release. As backlist books, they're absolutely equal. So it's just another, I like to say it's another leg on your stool, right? If you have a two-legged stool, that's not a stool. You can't sit on that. You've got a three-legged stool. We're starting to get some stability. 4 is even better. And that's where my nonfiction comes in. It's just another leg on the stool.
Yeah. Did you cross promote to your readership, or did you really try and have Ainsley and like build a brand new audience, or did you dip into Zoe's readers?
I dip into Zoe's readers, and I do think that has like some downsides to it, but I needed to. Like, it was very hard to continue to promote Ainsley when Ainsley only had a couple of titles out. And so sharing it to the Zoe list definitely helped. It's like, oh, it's such a hard decision of like that bird in hand versus like holding out for like a different kind of success down the road. My alter ego is the first time that I have kept something completely separate. And that's also a bit of an experiment on my part, just so that I could have data to share with other authors. I do think that there are pros and cons to both approach. One is not better than the other. But the fact that my Zoe readership, and a good chunk of my Zoe readership does read my Ainsley books, they like that it's separate though, because it's a different brand promise. Like as Zoe, I would never write something that has a cliffhanger, that where the characters are not necessarily like good people. My most recent Ainsley book is a book called Shame. And it's a marriage and trouble story. And it starts with the protagonist finding out that her husband is cheating on her. And in a Zoe book, that would be the end of their relationship. That's a deal breaker. And she would go on to like meet a very lovely lumberjack who would never cheat on her. Like that's the Zoe story. That's what I would write. But sometimes I like to play in more complicated waters. And so Shame is about them breaking up and then getting back together and realizing that even though he has hurt her, they are each other's lobster kind of thing. And so he has to, like sit in that pain and just figure out how to be a partner to her again. And I love that story. And a lot of my Zoe readers read it because it's under that Ainsley. Whereas if I published that as Zoe, it would be like end of days.
Your readers would be like, what is this?
What is this? Why are you doing this to us? Why do you hurt us?
We have a question here asking, would you still write this much if you didn't have as many readers?
Well, yes, because I actually write less now than I did before. Having more readers means that I can write less. I wrote the most when I didn't have readers at all. And I knew I was hustling in the direction of getting readers. So it requires having a bit of faith in yourself that if I write it, they will come. And it will take time. So when I started, because of Romance Divas, I knew that if I build this framework, readers will come. No guarantee on how many readers, but readers will come. And things like having like a Facebook reader group, for example, which is like, I don't know if I would do that again today. My alter ego doesn't necessarily, but in 2013, it was the thing to build. So I put a Facebook together. And for 6 months, there were only 5 people in that. And one of them was my Uncle Matt. And then, right? Like, I mean, that certainly doesn't fill you with enthusiasm to keep writing. But I knew that if I just kept going, and then I was in an anthology. I was actually in a couple of anthologies over the end of 2013 through across all of 2014, a number of them. They were quite successful. And with each new exposure to a new audience, I would pull more people into my reader group. And as soon the first anthology went from 5 to about 60 people in my reader group. And as soon as we started sharing pictures of attractive firefighters without their shirts on, my Uncle Matt exited stage right. Which was, that was fine. He did thank you so much for your early support, Uncle Matt, but we're good now. And then my reader group, would expand and expand and expand. And it wasn't until, there's a principle of 1,000 fans. It comes from music. If you have 1,000 fans and you're a band and you sell $100 of merch to each person each year, that's $100,000 of income. That's full-time money, etc. Something like that. As an author, if you only have 400 fans, but they buy every book, then you need to write more books in a year to make a threshold income. Whereas if you have built up 10,000 fans, you can write, less than half of the same to reach the same threshold income. So it's actually an inverse relationship is what I'm saying. Very long answer to say. It's an inverse relationship. The more fans I have, the less I need to write to support my family.
Nice. Well, there's some questions coming through about marketing. I think you kind of touched on some of it there, but so how did you you were just saying that when you started, you had your Facebook group and the anthologies and stuff. Was there anything that you did in addition to this, marketing, on the very early days, when you don't have the backlist necessarily, you don't have the accolades yet? And then Jennifer has an addition to this. Is there a way to market yourself without Facebook?
Oh, yeah. So early on, I was actually just looking at Goodreads yesterday because Alessandra Torre recently has done a couple of really good Goodreads talks about how to use it as an author. And it reminded me that in those early days, I leveraged the heck out of Goodreads. I was in a lot of groups. I would offer my advanced review copies up there to anyone who would take one. And that's free. You just have to hustle, find groups that have open calls for review copies, and then you can post what your book is and then share it. And I noticed that, like, for example, my early books have way more Goodreads reviews than my newer books. My new books sell better than my old books did. But I really leveraged that as a platform. I would contact bloggers directly. I would write individual emails to them. I don't do that anymore. And I planned to get to 4 books in a series as soon as possible so I can make the first one free. And I really do think that making that first book in the series free is a big game changer. Even today, being able to pay to market it is even better. But even if you can't afford to pay to market it yet, you can make it free and just use that kind of like passive low barrier to entry to your world. So if you're kind of writing across a couple of different things, I would try to tighten up and write one thing for a little bit so that you can get at least one series like that. And then each time you duplicate that, it amplifies the value of that across your catalog. I mentioned in 2018, I took a break from writing. And one of the metrics that I tracked at the time was, there's construction going on outside. I hope you guys can't hear that.
My neighbors are playing the guitar, so you could potentially hear that as well.
One of the things that I tracked was how many books I had available for free. And in 2018, I went from, and keep in mind, I have a big catalog with like multiple series, but I went from having 5 books free in 2017 to 8 books free in 2018. And that, the more access points to your catalog, the more read through you will have of your catalog. But you can plan for that from the very beginning, even if you don't have a big catalog yet.
Nice. And with talking about marketing outside of Facebook, I know that you're pretty active on TikTok. Yeah. I haven't delved into it yet because just frankly, I can't have another thing. I can't have another app. But tell me about the value you're finding out of TikTok and like, especially Book Talk in particular, like people are purchasing and yeah, just tell me your experience about it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that people might notice if they start to get into TikTok is it's not necessarily your ebook sales that jump up, although Outliers definitely will. I mean, it can send books onto the top 100 list or whatever. But paperback sales, you will see a marked increase because for most indie authors, our paperback sales are pretty low. So any jump is like, hey, that's noticeable. I would say that since I joined TikTok, my paperback sales have doubled, which wasn't like a significant number, but it's enough that I'm like, I see regular paperback sales on books that I did not before, and they are the books I'm talking about on TikTok. So Book Talk is, it's a little bit like the Wild West of social media at the moment. It does require putting yourself out there, which is not everyone's personality type. That being said, it is not like Instagram. You do not have to be perfect or polished or anything like that. What you do want to do is kind of figure out, actually, I'm not going to say you want to figure this out. It's more about, it's a wonderful place to do some iteration. Skye Warren, when she talks about Facebook ads, she talks about you need to iterate your ad copy, the text, and your ad images. TikTok is the perfect place to iterate your book pitch. So you're going to try a bunch of different video formats, and they don't all have to include your face. One of the most popular ones on Book Talk, I don't have a paperback on me, but you can kind of picture, you take a paperback and you kind of fan through the pages. So you just see pages flipping by. That is a very common Book Talk backdrop for text. And then on top of that, you would put a text box. And in that text box, you want to have the hookiest line that will make people, you want to create questions for people and be like, ooh, I need to read that book. That's the goal. And as indie publishers, That's not just the goal, but that's also part of our job, is to figure out how do we hook people to our books. So as daunting as TikTok seems, it is a wonderful place to practice that. Also, you can do it on an anonymous account. It certainly doesn't need to say your name. So I sometimes see people like will create a TikTok account and it will just say something like, I have one that says like small town romance. So you could do that on, if that helps anybody, it does not need to be your name. It doesn't need to be your face. So you can find videos just by opening TikTok and searching for the hashtag book talk. Sometimes you will see the top ones are usually bloggers, not authors. But if you keep searching, or you search for like book talk and like I wrote this or something like that, you'll start to find some authors. Follow some authors, see what they're doing. But it's less about copying what other people do and figuring out what's my angle for my book. And a lot of us have a lot of tension around that. But at the end of the day, that has major benefit to, like, for example, at the top of our blurbs, right? We often want to have like a bolded line. That bolded line is something that you can iterate on TikTok, and whatever works best on TikTok, try putting that at the top of your blurb. You might see that boosts your ebook sales, even like just on retailer platforms.
I love that idea. It's like using it as your own sounding board, like getting live feedback. Yeah, that's super clever. And it kind of ties back to, metadata being like so important, and like something that you talk about a lot, and like having the good taglines, and, being able to do the elevator pitch for your book, right? So I didn't even consider using TikTok for something like that. So awesome. I hope that was a good takeaway from anyone in the audience. So we're coming up on the hour here, and it's been so wonderful. I could keep talking to you for the rest of the day. And hopefully we'll meet in person again soon, so we can have these conversations. But I was wondering, let us know, what are you working on right now? What's next for Zoe and Ainsley and mysterious pen name?
So even though I talked about the importance of series, the next book that I'm releasing is actually a complete standalone. It's called A Navy SEAL for Christmas. And it's like a dirty Hallmark movie. It's very soft and fluffy, but very open door, about a teacher who takes an art class, like a life drawing class. So the artist, or the model, is nude, and he's very handsome. And then when she goes home, and it turns out he's her new next door neighbor. So it's like a very cute, I really love it. I first drafted it last year, and so I'm revising it and releasing it this year. And that comes out December 7th. And then on December, I think it's 28th, it falls between Christmas and New Year's, is my next nonfiction book, which is called Romance Your Goals. And the core of Romance Your Goals, I talk about this in the blog post on Kobo Writing Life, is this question of, what do you want to be writing 5 years from now? And how can we get you pointed in that direction now? If what you are working on right now is not pointing in that direction, chances are at some point between now and then, you're going to get really frustrated about you're not achieving your goals because you're not pointing in the right direction. So it's my third nonfiction book. It's probably going to be my last nonfiction book for a while. I feel like I'm starting to run out of things I want to say in the publishing space. Not forever, but just for now.
I'm like, you're full of advice. You can't cut us off, Zoe.
But I think not all advice is meant to be enshrined in a book.
That's
and I'm really enjoying. So the other thing that I do, other than like podcast interviews, is lately I have been doing a live Clubhouse chat on Friday afternoon. So if anybody is on Clubhouse, you can find me there. Basically,
I have dipped into a couple of your talks. They're very helpful as well. Yeah.
If there's a social media platform, I'm on it. I'm willing to try it. I'm also willing to like walk away. So in the same way, I'm like, you can take a hiatus from writing a book. You can take a hiatus from social media too. So yeah, on Friday, I'll be on Clubhouse. In December, I have a couple books coming out. And between now and then, I'm just like revising and writing, and then working on my secret project, which is a lot of fun too.
Awesome. Well, this has been really wonderful. Lots of thank yous in the comments for your time. And Dana's really into your dirty Hallmark premise. So excited to see that book coming out for sure. But thanks so much, Zoe. And we'll have to have you back once your experiment is done. You can tell us how that went.
I will. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.